the material discovered, and by the way, Dr. Abedi, when the arrival of American forces had occurred, went straight to David Albright, I believe I'm right in saying, and led them to the spot, which he hadn't been able to do, or had no possibility of doing, before then. This was not in order, therefore, for it to form part of his private collection. You may well be right that your friend is a fraud, the man who went to the meeting in Damascus, but the record of the meeting with the North Koreans does exist. We know partly about it because the North Koreans were given a deposit before the meeting began, quite a large one, and when the coalition arrived on the borders of Iraq, they broke off the negotiations to sell the long-range missiles, went back to Pyongyang, taking the deposit with them instead of returning it, which led to a row within the party. We have the whole CD of that, of those conversations. But the most important concession, I think, that Scott Ritter has just made is that now we know, as he says, with all the information we've acquired since the invasion, we are enormously better informed about what Iraq was and was not doing. Absent an invasion, absent a removal of the regime, we would be taking the regime's word for it. No responsible president of the United States could possibly report back to his Congress and his electorate that that was what he was doing. That would be an impeachable stupidity. We can now certify Iraq as disarmed. Good. Plus, positive. A direct result of regime change, which is the only way inspection can be done. Mr. Ritter would never have set foot in Iraq if it hadn't been for the victory in Desert Storm.
I have a question for you.
By all means.
Okay. Then I want to get back to that gentleman who went to Damascus supposedly shopping, because I think we have to deal with that a little bit.
Well, this is all verifiable.
What was Hans? Here's what occurs to me. You say the only way we could be certain that he was in fact disarmed was to go in, invade, and occupy and take a look.
Yes.
Then why did the president, seemingly under duress, why was he moved to let Hans Blix go in and certify that they had disarmed? What would have happened? Easy. Well, so was the president lying? Was he being disingenuous when he said, "Okay, you're right, we'll go through the UN and we'll let Hans Blix and his team, his UNSCOM team, determine whether he has still retained the capacity with respect to these weapons of mass destruction"? And by the way, the president, I think correctly, threatened him that you better allow them unfettered access every place. So if you say, and if the president knew what you seem to posit now, that the only way to be assured that he was disarmed was to go in and see for ourselves, why did he go through this facade, this scheme of letting Blix make believe he was trying to determine that?
Well, I can see my macro points are going to have to stay on hold for a bit, but I'm quite willing to walk back the cat this way if you wish. The sequence of events, as I recall it, was as follows. On the initiative of the administration, which called to the United Nations attention the fact that a huge number of resolutions on weapons of mass destruction in respect of Iraq had gone unenforced, which was agreed reluctantly by a rather shamefaced UN. They secured a 9-0 vote, including the vote of Syria, on the Security Council to say to Iraq by a certain deadline they had better prove what they'd done with the weapons they had disclosed. Now, I think this is a discrepancy between myself and Mr. Ritter, and I should be careful because of his superior expertise, but Iraq had given a list at a certain point. It said, okay, this was after the Kamel defection. They said, all right, okay, you got us, this is what we've got. It wasn't a whole hell of a lot, but it was significant. They said, we admit to this much, but they'd never produced it. It hadn't been brought to the inspectors to be verified, tagged, bagged, and destroyed. And let's have any confusion on what the UN inspectorate is. It's not an investigative body. It's not told, you go look, we'll let you look anywhere. It's a big country, you can send a few dozen people. Keep looking, we won't obstruct you. It's not their job, is it? The inspector's job is one of verification. They bring the evidence, they say, here's how we can prove our compliance. That never happened. In my opinion, that first resolution was enough authorization, and I think it's one of my few criticisms of Prime Minister Blair that for his own political purposes, he felt the need of a second resolution. Now, at that point, but this is a crucial point, the inspectors were reappointed, and Kofi Annan, I'll give him this much, said, I think we should reappoint Rolf Ekéus, the extremely brilliant Swedish socialist and diplomat who had run UNSCOM in the 90s and had destroyed more Iraqi weapons than the whole first Gulf War had. Mr. Chaos had a proven record of success and a proven record of curiosity about the existence of these awful weapons. Mr. Blix, on the other hand, had already certified Iraq in the 80s as clean and had meanwhile certified North Korea as kosher. The French vetoed and the Russians vetoed the appointment of Rolf Akers, his nomination by Kofi Annan, in favor of Hans Blix. Don't ask me why, okay? Though you just did.
Nobody's perfect, Christopher. Well, Scott.
And the UN, in the meantime, as we now know, was an open sewer of corruption between Annan's office right through all of its institutions into the oil for food racket that was fleecing and murdering the people of Iraq. And in May of 2003, had things remained as they were, the chair of the UN Special Committee on Disarmament would have been Iraq. And its chair would have been appointed by Saddam Hussein. And we'd have been in conformity with the UN resolutions and principles. That's what it would have meant.
Well,
get real. Get real.
It's a convenient prediction of the future that never occurred. But I will say this: if they were the chair of the Disarmament Committee, their statements and findings have no relevance whatsoever on the Security Council, which is responsible for making the final determination as to Iraq's disarmament status. You rightly point out that the original resolution 687 passed by the Security Council in April of 1991 calls for Iraq to submit a declaration that lists the totality of its holdings of weapons of mass destruction. It is the job of the weapons inspectors to go in and confirm the accuracy of this declaration, then oversee the disposition of this materiel. Correct. The burden of proof is firmly on the side of Iraq until the summer of 1991. A couple things occurred. A, 1 month after Security Council Resolution 687 is passed. This is a resolution that not only says Iraq must be disarmed, but links the continuation of economic sanctions imposed on Iraq in August of 1990, sanctions that at that time were linked to Iraq's withdrawal from Kuwait. Keep in mind that we liberated Kuwait in early 1991. There's now no longer a legal justification for the continuation of these sanctions. The United States puts forward this new resolution calling for the disarmament of Iraq, saying that until which time Iraq is found to be in compliance, these sanctions will remain in place. But there is a clear black and white rendering in this document that says, A, if Iraq is found to be in compliance, these sanctions will be lifted, and B, makes no reference whatsoever to regime change, getting rid of Saddam Hussein. He's not part of the equation. But 1 month later, in May 1991, Secretary of State James Baker, in an appearance before the United States Congress, says, even if Iraq is found to be in compliance with its obligation to disarm, economic sanctions will be maintained until which time Saddam Hussein is removed from power. Witness the true policy objectives and intent of the United States. It's not about disarmament. It's about getting rid of Saddam Hussein, which is the only way you can explain what happens in June 1991. Let me remind you, I fought in that war in 1991. I know what it means to wage war against Iraq. I know what we were fighting for. I know what was it about. And I supported the notion that Iraq must be held accountable to the rule of law. And the rule of law is set forth in Resolution 687 says that if Iraq does not do what the international community says, then the ceasefire is no longer in effect, and we must go in and finish the business. And I would have been the first to volunteer and fight on that front line. We found a convoy of 100 vehicles carrying nuclear enrichment equipment that Iraq had denied having. They not only said we don't have nuclear enrichment equipment, they said we don't have a nuclear weapons program, period. Well, we proved that to be a lie. At that point in time, if I had my druthers, I would have withdrawn every single inspector from Iraq. I would have put the Marines back online, and we would have finished the job. That's called enforcing the rule of law. What did the United States do?
The opposite.
Nothing.
Did the wrong thing
instead. They went to the Security Council, and they passed a new resolution, 707. And this is where you're wrong, Mr. Hitchens, because they did at that point in time transfer the burden of proof off of the shoulders of the Iraqis and onto the shoulders of the inspectors. Yes, Resolution 707 says Iraq must resubmit its declaration and be honest. But it also told the inspectors